Wide are the lands of the old North Kingdom, where the sea wind howls over stony hills and bends the grasses of the empty plains. It plays amid the ruins of cities and the barrows of kings, and whistles in the mountain tops of the east. Ask the wind for tidings, maybe, for you will seldom meet travelers in the lone lands of Eriador. Tales from the Lone Lands is the second expansion to the One Ring 2nd Edition RPG, and so far, out of all the stuff that has been put out, it is my favorite, and that includes the Moria book, which isn't out yet, but I have read through the alpha version. It's worth mentioning now that while I have read through the entire book, I have not played through its entirety. I have just recently finished the first chapter in a solo playthrough using Strider mode. If you are interested in seeing how my playthrough goes, you can download my adventure write-up through the link in the description. I originally planned to make this review after finishing the full playthrough, but given how long it has taken me to get this far, the One Ring might be in 3rd edition by the time that happens, which is why I've decided to talk about it now. So, what is Tales from the Lone Lands? What do I like and what do I not like? I'll start with a pretty broad overview that doesn't spoil the book, and then after I will get into a bit more detail. So let's dive in. This book builds off the Ruins of the Lost Realm, but at the same time the structure and content are quite a bit different. Ruins was more of a source book, with lots of information about the locations and peoples within Eriador, which is followed up with 12 simple, unconnected landmark adventures. Tales from the Lone Lands, on the other hand, features 6 large adventures that thread together to make one terrific campaign that can be played on its own or woven into a homemade adventure. The story feels really good within the world of Middle-earth, with its own epic stakes that don't step on the canon of Tolkien's books. Speaking of the canon, there is one really terrific tie-in to a hero from the Legendarium that made me so excited when it was revealed. Players will need to work together to stop the growing shadow that is spreading over Eriador. They will encounter orcs, trolls, and worse foes, sail far into the northwest of the Great Sea, find legendary swords and cursed rings, potentially do a prison break, learn about a secret way into Moria, and face a truly daunting final act. This book really does not pull any punches. Prepare to have your characters gain a lot of shadow and take many wounds. If you really play by the book, it is also very likely that you will fail in the end. This is a punishing adventure, full of some really terrific set pieces, interesting choices, and memorable NPCs. So much of this book really captures the melancholy of The Lord of the Rings, where people have been fighting the shadow for a long time, and they are tired. This gives the player characters a great chance to be heroes, and try to kindle hope in the hearts of those that they meet. At the same time, not everything needs to be burdened down with despair. Depending on how you run these adventures, I'd say at least half of them could have a more lighthearted feel closer to that of The Hobbit. Something interesting this book does that could be hit or miss is that there is a strong focus on one player hero. I won't get too much into this because it could be a bit spoilery, but it's worth mentioning that as a lore master, you will need to make sure that the other players don't feel like sidekicks to the main character. The book even includes a specific section with a few suggestions on how to do that. Having this focus on a single player hero shouldn't be seen as a negative though. As long as you pay attention to the backstories your other players come up with and weave that in, they probably won't even notice. Now, if you're not planning to run this as a group, but instead want to use it with Strider mode, then this element makes it a terrific adventure. I had never planned to run this adventure as a solo game, but while reading it, I quickly realized how well it was suited for Strider mode. I've got a few things I want to say about specific adventures that might spoil them if you haven't played through yet. If you want to skip to my final thoughts, go to this timecode. First off, I want to talk about the sections in this book that I haven't played through yet, but ones that I'm very excited to get to. I'll start with the second chapter in this book, Messing About in Boats. It is in this section that players will sail far into the northwest of the Great Sea, to an island that is supposed to be the resting place of a great hero of old, which turns out to be Turin's grave. I just love this. It shows the depth that Gareth Hanrahan and the team have gone to in order to find little adventure seeds from Tolkien's books. I had to go back to the Silmarillion to find this passage. It is told that a seer and a harp player of Brethil named Glirhuin made a song, saying that the stone of the hapless should not be defiled by Morgoth, nor ever thrown down, not though the sea should drown all the land, as after indeed befell, and still Tol Morwen stands alone in the water beyond the new coasts that were made in the days of the wrath of the Valar. It is here that players might also get to meet the ghost of Morwen, although she is not named. I'm guessing this could be a case of the very complicated rights issues with Tolkien's works beyond The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. One player will also get a powerful sword here, that is mentioned as having been forged with 2 metals, one of which is black. I wonder if that is supposed to be steel from Turin's sword. It doesn't quite make sense, but also fits somewhat, so perhaps it is left vague on purpose. Another bit of this book that I'm really excited to get into is the final chapter, The Quest of Aman-Gurothos. There is a really interesting NPC here named Ea, who comes from the elves that hid from the first messengers of the Valar, which is a really cool idea that at least one of these elves still remains, a strange, timeless hermit in an ever-changing world. It is also while meeting her that players will have the chance to sit down with one of the main adversaries of this adventure, Snava the Orc. What follows is this terrific scene where you have a strange group of people that should not be together, but who are forced into what could be a very tense situation. I really like this encounter, and I'm only sorry that I don't get to experience it with someone else being the lore master. Continuing on to the end of the campaign, again, it seems like it's going to be brutal, with the company having to face a lot of wraiths and even an undead dragon. Even with a large group, I think this would be very challenging, and I suspect I'm going to have to make some changes to have any chance of succeeding as a solo player. So, what are my final thoughts on Tales from the Lone Lands? Well, I just love it. I really enjoyed this adventure. This style of book is much more what I'm looking for, as opposed to the more open nature of Ruins of the Lost Realm, which gives you lots of tools to build a campaign instead of giving you a complete one. That's not to say that one is inherently better than the other. If you are just wanting information about Eriador to create your own adventures, then Ruins of the Lost Realm is the book you're going to want to go for. But again, these books do go really well together. In fact, I wish that they had been made as one book, even though I know that would have taken much longer to do off the start, but it would be nice to have everything in one book. The core rulebook is 237 pages long, Ruins of the Lost Realm is 120, and Tales from the Lone Lands is 111. So if Ruins and Tales were combined, they would be almost exactly the same size as the core rules. In my review of Ruins of the Lost Realm, I mentioned that I was a little disappointed in the size of the book. But even though Tales is even shorter, I don't have a problem with the page count because I enjoyed the content so much. Now, on the topic of size, there is something I have not talked about at all, but I do have a minor complaint about the physical dimensions of the One Ring books. They are just too tall to fit on my bookshelf. They are only about half an inch taller than D&D books, but it is just too much. Again, a minor complaint, but I wish I could have all my RPG books on one shelf. And while I'm on the topic of complaints, I might as well continue, although I really only have one, which is that the layout of things can be a bit complicated. To give an example, in the first chapter there is a character whose family is important, and I kept forgetting their names and I could never remember where they were because the character's story was split into several sections. The book also mentions that his family was made up of his wife, sons, and daughters, but then later it is mentioned that he only has 2 children. I might have just missed something, or maybe this is a mistake from an earlier draft of the adventure. I understand how stuff like this is hard to catch in editing, because there is nothing wrong with each individual instance, it is only when looked at as a whole that you see the mistake. Since I have only played through the first chapter, there are likely other instances of things like this later in the book, but I didn't notice any on my first read-throughs. Ultimately, these are small issues that are easily solved by the lore master just making a ruling. The only real trouble is that I did waste a bit of time flipping through the book trying to see if I missed something. The last thing that I wish was different about this book is that it should have a fold-out map. I really think all RPG books should have a big map. Ruins of the Lost Realm had a great map of Tharbad, the starter set had Eriador and the Shire, and Moria will have the famous dwarf city itself, so it would be nice to have one here. There isn't really a main location from Tales from the Lone Lands, but Bree features quite a bit, so a big map of the Bree lands and the Prancing Pony would have been very fun. Those are all my complaints about this wonderful book. Again, I really enjoyed Tales from the Lone Lands so much. If you have read or played through the campaign, what do you think about it? Do you prefer this style of book for the One Ring, or do you prefer something more like Ruins of the Lost Realm? Let me know in the comments below. As for what is coming up next, that will most likely be a new landmark adventure, Return to Valhalla, so stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching, have a great day.